Welcome back to the Draft Breakdown Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Cox. With me, as always, both my co-hosts tonight, Justin Higdon, trying to survive his first week of dadhood back at work. How are you doing, Justin?
I'm hanging in. I'm getting very little sleep, but the joys of parenthood. I'm taking care of the baby when I get home and enjoying every bit of it. So it's good to. I wouldn't say it's good to be back at work. It's not, but.
And of course, Justice Mosqueda, who is acting like this Green Bay Packers game is not happening against the Detroit Lions tonight.
The who?
Exactly.
Is that some action? You got some Monday night action? Thursday night action? No, man. I don't want this team anymore.
and we're joined by the one and only, the now famous Matt Harmon of NFL.com. We have an NFL.com writer on the podcast. So you're actually the second most famous Matt we've had on this podcast, though, Matt, because Matt Miller has like 150,000 Twitter followers. So he slightly beats you, but slightly.
Slightly.
But we're like super excited to have you on the show and happy that you're back with us. And we're happy for you in general that you broke through and you're mainstream now, man. First off, tell us about that opportunity and what you're doing at NFL.com, and then we'll get started on this show tonight.
Yeah, man, happy to be back here with you guys. It feels like forever that we were here talking about last year's draft, even though it wasn't that long. I guess maybe it was because I lived in a different state. But no, it's been really good as far as the career move goes. Just pumping out fantasy content, which thankfully is almost over. You get to the point in the fantasy season where kind of everything becomes a little bit repetitive. So now it's kind of cool to be focusing back on player movement and draft and stuff. So there's been a lot of really good opportunities that working for the NFL has afforded me, which we'll talk a little bit about tonight, of course. And yeah, so I'm loving it, man. It's great. It's obviously the dream, and I've gotten to do a lot of cool stuff in a short amount of time. So it's been great, and I'm thankful to still be able to come and hang out with you guys as well.
Hold up, I have one question about working. You work in the offices as like NFL Network, everyone, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
How often does
I hope I can actually answer this question. Like,
how often does Uncle Chaps come up?
Oh my God! So the day that he got the NFL handle, right? I was working that day and like just erupted in the room like, who is Uncle Chaps? Like, take the tweet down! Like, when I heard, like, Andrew Siciliano, the host of Around the NFL on NFL Network, he's yelling, he's like, in the corner, he's like, who is Uncle Chaps? That's not a real tweet! And I died. I mean, it was hilarious. He does come up more than you would expect. He is known a known pest around the NFL media, although also a respected colleague too. So it's kind of a weird balance.
So are they getting ready to float him an offer? Or I know you probably can't talk about that.
Well, I'll say this: they're either going to float him an offer, or he's going to mysteriously disappear. That's all I can say. That's all I can say on that matter.
Well, we brought you on to talk about what you kind of made a name for yourself with, and that's your scouting and your breakdown of wide receivers. And you tweeted out on Tuesday, I got some hot takes on the 2016 NFL draft class and the wide receivers. And, of course, I took that as, all right, we better get a podcast together because no one's more dialed into receivers and what they're doing than Matt Harmon. Explain the reception perception, and then, we'll get started on your takes.
Yeah, so reception perception is the, as you alluded to, is the methodology that I kind of developed in order to fully break down the complete picture of a wide receiver's game. I track pretty much everything they do on the field, where they line up, how much they're targeted on a per route basis, which I think is the most accurate indicator of volume and quality of player. I've actually had a lot of new theories I've been working around in my head on that one, but and also just how often they get open against man coverage, zone coverage, how often they run each route. The whole 9 yards is basically what reception perception is. And yeah, it's been great this year. Obviously, working for the NFL, a few weeks into it, I realized that I could access a database of all 22 for all the college teams, and I was like, oh, okay, well I know what I'm going to do now. So I've been getting to work charting a lot of receivers in there on Saturdays, and just starting to formulate a little sample of a bunch of different guys. So it's been great. Again, like I mentioned, it's pretty sick opportunity. So I wanted to take full advantage of it.
Well, I need some of that tape.
Can't do it.
You don't have to tell anyone.
I believe me. You're like the 50th person I think that's asked me about that. And
that goes through the NFL.com laptop, Justice, and you have to be able to scan your eye and give blood before you log on each time. So.
Oh yeah, I don't have any blood. I'm a Packer fan. We don't bleed.
I've already signed over my firstborn child. So it took some sacrifices.
That's fine. They can have any of the 5 of mine. So actually, I can only sacrifice 4. So I have to keep the girl. So we're talking tonight about the 2016 NFL Draft class, and specifically the wide receivers. I'm going to start with this, that there's a movement within the draft, the semi-big draft, and that's not a shot at him. He does a great job, but semi-big draft of Josh Norris, and then of the draft Twitter people.
No, we don't like Josh Norris. We made him eat a tweet.
Well, that doesn't mean we don't like him. That just means that we make him be an honorable loser when he is wrong, and that's okay. But
we all should do that, to be honest.
Yeah, but not all of us bet to eat tweets. We come up with other things.
Yeah.
Good. But they're coming up with Corey Coleman. I've seen your Twitter takes on Corey Coleman. He was your highest graded, I believe is how you put it, reception perception you did this year. So when you came out with your rankings, and these were off the cuff, as you said, but your rankings today, it was interesting to see where you ranked him after you said that he was your highest rated guy. So what was your thought on Coleman not being your highest rated guy, but having the highest in-game score, so to speak?
Well, I meant like this. The one game against WVU was the best game I've charted. But as far as the rest of his sample goes, it was not the best. But it was one of the best. But also just Coleman's an interesting one because I mentioned that I like right off the bat. The one thing is the most confusing about his sample. Like I mentioned, I chart targets on a per route basis, but that Baylor offense is so weird that like if the pass play is not going to his side of the field, like, and this is how they're taught to do it, they just kind of like stroll along the sideline. They don't really run a route or anything, and that's really confusing to chart, like, because I don't count that as a route because he's not even going out for a pass. Not to mention I couldn't mark that as any particular route on the route tree or against any coverage because you really have no idea what's going on. So he's a confusing evaluation in that way. Like, I mean, he's targeted on 58.9% of the routes, which is like that's like so far an outlier of what the NFL or college average is, even for one of the better receivers, that it's almost like that in and of itself makes it very confusing to evaluate him. But he's really a tremendous guy. The first 2 games I charted of him, he didn't really have to go up for any contested passes, but then in that WVU game, there were a couple that he did. And like I kind of said, he's a limited guy in what he's asked to do, but I think he shows a lot of potential in beating man and zone coverage and also against press, which is what you kind of want to see for a smaller guy. I've noticed that a lot of the receivers in this class have some drop issues. That's kind of been a theme throughout. And like 9.1% drop rate in the 3 games I have right now. I think it was mostly just the 2. 2 in the WVU game he had actually, which is crazy that he was also so productive, and then 1 in another game. So right now I feel really, really good about him. I just feel better about the 2 guys that I have ahead of him. I'm really like I could probably, I think Laquan Treadwell's number one. Spoiler alert. And then the other two guys, Doxson and Coleman, I could switch out either one of those because they're both really tremendous. But I don't have a lot of questions about Coleman right now. I think he does everything really, really well.
Let's get into your rankings then, and Justin and Justice hop on at any time with comments or questions. We'll start with Laquan Treadwell, your number one guy. Consensus number one guy for 2016 before the leg break in 2014, if that makes sense. And then the questions happen. Is he going to come back? Is he the same guy? Is he fast enough? All of the normal wide receiver questions come into play. How far above is he than other wide receivers? And two, if you could comp him a little bit to another player, who would that be?
Yeah, I think that he is pretty clearly the number one for me right now just because of how impressive he is on the field. Although I don't think that if one of you guys or anybody else wanted to tell me that somebody else was, the number one, I think we mentioned Josh, he has Corey Coleman number one, or at least he did for a while. I'm not going to argue that too heavily at this point. But I think what makes him the clear number one is not only because he's obviously a tremendous player, but because he has the build that you look for. He has tremendous quickness in and out of his breaks, and I've seen. So you talk about comps. I've seen some people compare him to Alshon Jeffrey, and I actually think that's kind of like doing Treadwell a disservice even at this point. And that sounds crazy because Jeffrey's one of the best receivers in the league, and I love him as a player. But he's also like a specific archetype of receiver where I think Treadwell has the potential to be that transcendent type. Dez Bryant is kind of too easy of a comp. That gets thrown out a lot, and I also really hate giving the elitist of elite level comparisons. But when I look over Treadwell's scores so far for 3 games, he actually as far as his success rate versus man and zone coverage, he's actually super comparable to Allen Robinson's rookie year, and I actually think that that's a pretty fair comparison. Treadwell actually might be more physically overwhelming as far as his speed for his size goes, but I still think that the way they play the ball in the air, the way they can make plays after the catch, and they're sneaky good underneath route runners, I think that those two are actually pretty comparable. And everybody knows how I feel about Allen Robinson, so that should kind of give you an inkling into what I feel about Treadwell.
So, Robinson, do you worry about Treadwell's 40 time at all? Because that's something that's been brought up a lot, but I mean, Treadwell's so strong that I think even when those wheels start falling off, you don't want to compare guys to Anquan Bolden and things like that, but he's just so goddamn strong that I think that he'll be able to stick around even if he doesn't have the wheels that he has right now. I think he's fine, but people seem to be worrying about if you run something like a 4.6 flat.
Yeah, well, I mean, Robinson ran a 4.6 flat too, so I don't really.
Right? There was actual things going on with Robinson.
Yeah, I don't really know exactly, but yeah, no, I think that I wouldn't worry too much about the 40 time. Also, I think long speed in general is super overrated, especially for a big-bodied player like that. What I'm more impressed with is how smooth he is and is able to kind of control his speed through his size. Especially, like I said, I think he's underrated as kind of a route runner right now. So no, I wouldn't worry too much about the 40 time thing.
Hey, Matt, I want to jump back to Corey Coleman real quick. You mentioned a very good point about the Baylor offense and how they don't really run a route when they're not being targeted on that play. That obviously is the whole point of that is to keep their legs fresh throughout the game. So that's something that's obviously not going to carry over to him being in the NFL. Do you think that's going to be an adjustment period? I mean, with not just talking about the type of offense that Baylor runs, but the fact that he's going to be, especially if he's a highly drafted guy, he's going to be expected to be on a high percentage of plays, and he's not necessarily used to running full speed the entire game. What's the adjustment period, and how concerned are you about that?
Yeah, I think that's actually a legitimate concern that you bring up, and maybe it will affect him as a rookie, especially. I could easily see that being something that he hits a wall with early in his rookie year. Of course, that's we're projecting pretty far down the wire at this point, but I don't know if that necessarily that would be a long-term concern. I look at Kendall Wright, came out of the same sort of system, and you could say that he definitely has not lived up to what his draft pedigree would have assumed. But I also think that that's pretty circumstantial. I think he's a pretty solid player. I think Coleman definitely, I would say definitely offers more potential at this point, knowing what we know about Wright's career. But that is definitely something interesting to note. I don't really know how it would affect him but you're right though. When I watch him and chart his games, you can really tell that he goes full throttle on the routes that he runs, and it does make that a really unique evaluation. Like I mentioned up top, he's the one who's like, his numbers just kind of like make the system look really weird because it's a very much adapted to chart for a regular NFL receiver. So that style of offense kind of throws some of the things out of whack.
I kind of want to piggyback off that question and looking at the rest of your rankings that you sent out today. Number 2 behind Treadwell, you had Josh Doxson, and then you had Corey Coleman, and then you had Shepard from Oklahoma. All 3 Big 12 receivers. Obviously the knock on that conference is the poor defenses that are throughout that conference. That was a knock on Baylor and TCU's early season schedule, even getting up into the last couple of weeks. So I agree with you that all 3 of those guys are really talented receivers, and they're obviously putting up big time numbers. How much of an adjustment is it going to be facing just tougher defenses?
I think that is definitely a legitimate concern, and one of the reasons that I haven't completed all the sample sizes yet, because I'm kind of I don't want to chart when I remember looking at one of the receivers' games and they were playing a school called Lamar, and I was like, I don't think I'm going to chart this game because I don't even know I've never heard of this.
That was Baylor.
Yeah, it was Baylor. I was like, I've never heard of this particular educational institution, so I don't think I'm going to chart this game. But I think that's definitely something to watch. So I've been waiting to adjust for better competition. Not that, like you mentioned, in the Big 12, it's probably not going to come. And also that one of my own critiques to reception perception has been that I don't really know how to accurately adjust for strength of competition, or at least objectively do it and then make it sort of for NFL like a league-wide thing without me actually charting every cornerback, which I'm not going to do. So I don't really know how that fits into it, but I do think that there's a way to isolate a player. And I think that's one thing that reception perception does really well, is by being quarterback and defensive, quality of defender agnostic. I think that you can definitely still get a picture of who a player is. And Shepard is one of the ones that I really, really like, and we can definitely go more into detail about him later, because I still think you can see him doing detailed and nuanced things in certain instances, despite what the defender is doing. I think that strength of competition is definitely something that's important, but it can be overblown if the receiver still shows the necessary traits and abilities to work things out, even if the competition is better. Because one thing that would be kind of disconcerting would be to see a receiver kind of slack through their technique or their routes or anything that they're doing assignment-wise based on the competition. And when you see a guy still doing things flawlessly, even competition dictates you might not necessarily have to, I think that's still a really good sign.
So let's say I'm watching a 17-0 Green Bay Packers game. My Green Bay Packers need a new receiver. Who's going to be like the Nelson Aguilar guy who's like tabbed as like he's a Packers type? Who's going to be that receiver in this class in your opinion?
If by Packers type you mean like kind of real, I guess for Aguilar, like a technique sort of guy, a smaller sort of potential slot flanker receiver. Mm-hmm. I think that could be Shepard, who I mentioned earlier. I tweeted a few weeks ago that during my charting I had found a guy that I think I'm going to like a lot more than everybody else. Or he's going to, no, I don't know if I'd say that, but like he's going to be my guy or whatever, which Aguilar was kind of my guy last year, or one of them. That hasn't turned out so well as a rookie, but nevertheless.
We can blame Chip. That's fine. It's Chip's fault.
It's totally Chip's fault. Absolutely. It's Chip and Bradford, man. It's all their fault. But I think that could be Shepard. He was the guy who I was alluding to in that tweet, and I think that he is a really advanced. I think he's going to get kind of grouped into like a Jarvis Landry sort of slot receiver role, that sort of mold. But I also think that while he's not an overwhelming, like take it over the top type of player, I think that he is really advanced as far as his route running is concerned right now. And I think let me pull it up right now. He has the highest success rate versus man coverage that I've charted so far, and I have 3 games of him done, which is probably about, since the college season is 13 games, NFL is 16. I'll probably do like a 6 or 7 game sample size where I normally would do 8 for NFL. So right now I'm about halfway through with Corey Coleman, and like I mentioned, he has an 85.2% success rate versus coverage, which is super, super high. That is an outlier number. And like Justin mentioned, some of that could be the competition, but also I think that Shepard shows great ability against press coverage, getting releases underneath, but he can also take it over the top too. I mentioned that's not his strength, but I think that while he might, I don't know what he's going to run or anything. I generally feel like I have a tough time gauging how fast a player is when I'm just straight up watching them. But I do think that he has the skills to separate down the field, not necessarily with speed, but with the way he sets guys up, the way he doesn't tip off his vertical routes, I think is really impressive. I could see him sliding into an offense like Green Bay's really early and contributing as a rookie. I think he does everything really well. I still think I need to see him make more plays in contested situations, but one thing that I think about contested catches in general is I think it can lead to a lot of like false positives or false negatives about a prospect, because it's, especially when you're just watching a broadcast copy, it's those are the plays that you get the most like visceral reaction. So I think we tend to overrate those guys in some ways. So I don't really care as much based on the player type that I think he is, like you mentioned. I don't really care how many contested catches he makes, because that's not really going to be his game. I think he could be the guy that you're alluding to.
Okay. Yeah, I usually hit DBs and receivers last, so I've seen like the big guys, like I've seen Jalen Ramsey and guys like that, and guys on the offensive side of the ball. But I mean, I've watched Oklahoma games, but I haven't really studied Shepard. I guess he's second ranked on NFL Draft Scout, and they're pretty good with their projected 40 times and height and stuff, and they say he should be around 5'10 flat, 5'10 and a quarter, and then he's gonna run a 4.52, which isn't like. It's not good, but that's not a bad number for a guy. Like, Jarvis Landry ran way slower than that, right? Didn't he run like a 4.7 or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and people still haven't let it go. But that's another take for another day. But I think also Rashard Higgins is a guy that could kind of be in the same mold of that Packers receiver that you're talking about. He's a guy who I think he was super productive last year with Garrett Grayson, and I think I know Justin was a pretty big Garrett Grayson fan, and I think he's definitely suffered this year without that quarterback play. It definitely has not been as good. I know they've at least had 2 guys rotating in there, whether it's due to injury or whatever. I don't really know. I don't follow things that closely. So, but the thing about Higgins is I think that he shows a lot of potential to be kind of that underneath slot receiver, but he also plays a lot of outside. He only has 8.9% of his snaps that I have in the slot over the 3 games that I've charted so far. So I think what makes him unique is that I could really see him end up being any type of receiver, but he's also really good after the catch. He's only brought down on first contact 38.5% of the like open field attempts that he has I've charted, which is one of the more fun things for me to look at, because I don't think a lot of people do a good job of quantifying like what is or is not a broken tackle or anything like that. But so he's another guy that I could see like becoming sort of a Randall Cobb-ish sort of receiver.
So Matt, here's a guy who's not on your list and has generated some interest, not just in myself, but other people on Twitter in the draft community, and that's Leonte Carroo from Rutgers. He's a guy who was at least in contention last year for the Big Ten Receiver of the Year. I think he was finished second, and and he wasn't too thrilled about that. But a guy who's been very productive throughout his career. He missed a couple of games earlier this year because of an off-the-field situation, and I think he also had an injury, but still very productive player, and a guy who has been productive despite kind of a terrible situation and environment at Rutgers this year and some pretty spotty quarterback play throughout his entire career. What is your take on Carew? Is he a player, in your opinion, is he a day two player, or is he a guy who's just been kind of productive and it's kind of an illusion?
Well, I could definitely see him being a day two pick, maybe a third round sort of guy, but he's one of the ones that I mentioned. I was talking with Jeff Lloyd about him a little bit earlier today. He's one of the ones that I've only done like one game on him, so I wouldn't say that my reception perception numbers are anything indicative right now of or indicative of what he might be as a prospect, but I do think that he offers a lot of good things that I like. I think that he can get vertical. I think that he can also break tackles underneath. He has an odd way of running routes where, like, when he kind of starts, like when he starts in a route, I'm always like, I don't think he's going to get any separation on this, but he seems to do things at the break point of routes to gain that separation. So I need to kind of hone in on what exactly he is doing, whether it's translatable or not. But I'm definitely interested in him. Like I said, I think he has some intriguing abilities as a route runner that I want to get more familiar with. And I can see like why you're saying he was productive with a lot of bad quarterback plays, and I could see that just based off watching him, how he would be that type of player, being able to present an accurate target or an easy target for a less than accurate quarterback. I think he has that ability. So he's one that I don't have a firm take on him right now, but I'm really interested from what I've seen so far.
Carew, to me, just for our listeners, I do think he's a day two guy. I do think probably second round type of player, because he doesn't have Treadwell's size, but he's a guy who's 6'6", 6'1", over 200 pounds. A solidly built player, good speed as you mentioned. He does gain separation, regardless of how he does it. He does it, and he's a guy who really plucks the ball away from his body, uses his hands really well, picks up big yards after the catch, and he's been super productive in terms of scoring and yards after the catch. So Carew's a player I'm really interested in seeing how people evaluate him, because preseason we've talked about Tony Pauline many times on this show and how plugged in he is. And preseason, Tony Pauline had Carew, I believe, as a 7th round guy, and that was pretty surprising to me, and especially after I've had a chance to watch him for several games.
Yeah, I would definitely obviously put him better than the 7th round. That's interesting. You mentioned there was some off-the-field stuff. I don't really know the background on that. But yeah, as a player, I'm super interested in him. I think you summed that up really well, especially the hands part. Like I mentioned, I've seen a lot of guys, and I don't really drops. Same thing that I mentioned earlier about the contested catches. I think we can definitely overrate drops. I know I have in the past, because you have that negative reaction to it, and it sticks with you more than just. Which is why I like watching and charting receivers on a route-to-route basis, because you can see the full story of who they are, not just this one super like negative moment. And I think like tape watchers in general. And I mean, I'm not being pejorative with that term, because I am one, I guess. So I think in general you can really get misled to overrate guys who make great contested catches, and then by the same token underrate guys who have drop problems, because you in your mind weight it too heavily subconsciously. But like my point was but Carew is one of the. I don't know where I'm losing myself here, but my point was there that Carew is one of the few guys that I've watched so far that I think has really good hands. I haven't like noticed a lot of drop issues with him.
We haven't talked about Josh Doxson yet, so why don't we hit on him just a little bit?
Yeah, I really like Josh Doxson. I mean, I think I was on RotoViz Radio a while ago, I think a couple weeks ago, and afterwards I mentioned to them that I was doing some of this reception perception charting. So we talked a lot about these guys off air, and Matt Friedman of RotoViz mentioned that he really thinks that in a lot of ways Josh Doxson reminds him of Nuke Hopkins, and I think that's a pretty interesting I mean, obviously that sounds pretty good considering what DeAndre Hopkins is doing in the NFL right now, but I also think that there's some value to that comparison because Hopkins is a guy that doesn't really have any elite tools other than like his hand size and that sort of stuff, but he does everything so freaking well. Like, I mean, there's nothing where I watch DeAndre and I think like he needs to work at this because he's at least very good at everything, but then he's like transcendent in his ability to adjust to the ball in the air, to make just these these just unhuman like moves in order to catch a pass, and also he's a really good route runner too, and I think that's what Doxson is. I mean, he's crazy productive at TCU. I can't remember the stat I saw, but I know there's some ridiculous number of like when he was playing, the amount of receiving yards he accumulated to the next highest guy at TCU is outrageous. I like Doxson a lot. He lines up pretty much always at right wide receiver on the line of scrimmage, but as far as what he does as a receiver, I think he does everything incredibly well. Like I said, he's another one that gets the Alshon Jeffrey comparison just because he's really good at making contested catches, and I don't think that really justifies what he is as a player because I think he gets a ton of separation, and he looks like he's doing it, without even trying. That's one of and I'm not saying that he's not trying, but that's one of my favorite things to watch in a receiver is when these guys can do it effortlessly. And I think that Doxson runs, the really high value routes too. Obviously, being in a stripped down college system is going to do that for you, but he runs pretty much the 9, the post, the curl, and the slant, and he runs those all really well. But then also you'll see him run the next highest route that I have him outside of those is the comeback route, and I think he uses his feet really well on comebacks to gain separation, to come back to the ball, and I mentioned how he plucks it away from his body is tremendous. I mean, I don't really have a take on Trevon Boykin as a quarterback or whatever. I'm not in that business anymore. I never was in that business. I don't know what I'm saying, but I'm not I don't really care about what he is as a quarterback. But I know he definitely struggles with throwing an accurate football sometimes, and I think Doxson really bails him out well. So I love Doxson, and I could see like if we go along in the process, I could see him end up being my number one guy, just because he's so incredibly good at everything. So I could drop him. I feel like I could drop Doxson on an NFL field right now, and he would function at least.
Hey Matt, what I love about Josh Doxson, and you mentioned Boykin, what I love about Doxson is how he works with a quarterback like Boykin, who creates a lot of improv situations with his mobility, with his scrambling, and how Doxson and he are always on the same page as far as getting open when Boykin's doing that scrambling. Doxson will take his route that he's supposed to be running, and he'll break it off and create a new route, and it allows those two guys to make plays. It reminds me a little bit of the way that Johnny Manziel and Mike Evans worked together at Texas A&M, and we heard some similar take about Evans at that time, that he was bailing out Manziel on some of these plays. I see the same thing with Doxson and Boykin, so I love that about his game.
Yeah, I agree.
That's one thing that, like, James Jones in Green Bay, there's a reason why he's stuck in Green Bay and he wasn't able to really do anything in Oakland or in New York. I mean, it's all every catch that he has is almost just chemistry based off of broken plays with Aaron Rodgers. That alone will get you on the field in the NFL. I was going to ask you, Matt, so you chart all these guys and things like that, right? But what do you do with guys who are like converted quarterbacks? Do you even look at them as receiving prospects? So like if I said like someone like Boykin or someone, right? Like Boykin like getting looked at as like a potential slot receiver at the next level. How would you go toward projecting them?
Yeah, well, there's obviously no way to do it with reception perception, obviously, because he's not running a route or anything like that. But I think what you're looking for, it's tough. I mean, the conversion projects are almost like a nightmare to me. I really don't have a good answer for like the best way to do it.
You're not like breaking down combine catching mechanics and stuff like things
no.
like that.
No, I mean
those people on the timeline, I've seen them. Y'all are crazy. Y'all are legitimately crazy.
Yeah, man, they're out. They're out. Yeah, go outside. Get a dog. But no, like I mean, there's some ways to do it, I guess. But I also think that that's super misleading because just I mean, the way you function as a quarterback is good if you're an intelligent quarterback that understands like route concepts and stuff like that. I think that helps you with the transition. But I also think that it's just two completely different positions. I don't know how to don't have a good answer, to be honest.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, no, I mean I hope
that's better than like half the people on draft Twitter who just kind of stick neck out for no reason and then just whoop, my throat slit.
Yeah, no, I'm not about that life.
When we look at this receiver class overall, we always go back to the 14 class, I believe it was, with Odell Beckham and Mike Evans and all those guys, and now Sammy Watkins coming into play. Is this class that deep, or can it be that deep, or is this kind of top heavy with two guys that kind of fit everywhere in Treadwell and Doxson, and then some, a guy like Coleman who may have to go to a team that understands how to use him correctly? Something we talked about with Emery Hunt on the show a couple weeks back.
Yeah, top heavy would be probably a good way to describe it, but it depends on how some of these guys end up sorting out. Like these guys. Like I like Shepard probably. Like I said, I'll probably end up liking him more than other people will. So I think he kind of contributes to that top group as well. But then it's going to depend on how guys like Michael Thomas, Rashard Higgins, Leonte Carew, these guys that we're talking about now, it depends on how they end up sorting into the mix, because like you said, I mean Treadwell, Coleman, and Doxson, those guys are like a clear, really good prospects to me up at the top. And it just depends on how those other guys fill in, because there are some guys like the two guys that are highly regarded that I don't have a great feel for yet. Like I don't know. I think I know what I stand, but I don't know for sure. Would be Tyler Boyd, and I would love to hear anybody's thoughts on Boyd, and Michael Thomas. I don't really know how I feel about him yet either. Those are two of like the top end guys. I don't really know where I feel with them. And then there are some lower. Like I watched Ricky Seals-Jones the other day, and I wish I hadn't. He was a nightmare. So yeah, he's the worst guy I've watched so far. And so I haven't gotten like that far down the range of like where they're being listed at this point, but I'm interested to see how the depth shakes out, because I do think it's a really quality class at the top.
Yeah, I know you mentioned Mike Thomas, and I know I'm very high on him, and not just because he's an Ohio State guy, but because he's a really fine, precise route runner, and he's got good hands. I think he's going to test pretty well, and he's a very good-sized guy. He was their #1 receiver last year when everybody was touting Devin Smith, who was really the deep threat, and we've seen how he's kind of struggled to adjust kind of beyond that. But Mike Thomas is a guy I'm very high on. I know Kyle Posey is a friend of the show, is also very high on him. So that's interesting. And Ricky Seals-Jones is an interesting name that you bring up, because I think it was Jeff Risdon who was on with us a few weeks back, and I believe he said he classified Seals-Jones as one of the most disappointing players that he's encountered this season.
First on Seals-Jones, the one thing that I thought about him, there's a researcher that works at NFL Network. His name's Dennis. Eric Stoner knows him, and like he's a really great guy, really smart about football. He was the one who mentioned that I should watch him and just to see my reaction. And the first thing I said to him after I did a couple games, like, dude, this is like the worst case scenario of Jordan Matthews that we're like kind of seeing play out, and I think they're like similar players. So that right away, that kind of made us both vomit. So yeah, I agree. He's a really disappointing player to me, which is weird because there's not he's the big, like he was the one like big guy I pulled off the list, and just doesn't at all translate that way. But Thomas is really interesting because I think the first game I watched him, and it might have been Western Michigan. I can't say for sure. I'd have to go back and really look through my notes, but I kind of came away a little bit like I didn't see the hype, but then I watched a couple more games, put them in through reception, perception, and then I was really, really impressed with him. So I'm kind of still trying to find where I fit with him, but I do agree that I see a lot of really precise things that I think some people are going to overlook because of the offense he plays in, which, Justin's like a super run-heavy offense. They don't ask the receivers to do a lot, but I think he's doing a lot on his own. Again, it's just not showing up because of the offense around him.
Anything else on the receivers you guys want to ask Matt? Or Matt, anything you want to talk about outside of receivers?
Which one's going to be Janice, Matt? Which one's going to be the athletic freak that everyone loves for no goddamn reason? Can I say that? Did I just get bleeped?
Should be.
I don't know. Like I said, I haven't gone that far down the range yet to know that. So, but Janice is fun. I took a little shot at, just like a joking shot at Metrics Twitter when I was tweeting with Davis Maddock tonight, and I said, Metrics Twitter helping us identify all the best punt gunners around the NFL. So
that's right. Shouts to Justin Bethel, the best punt gunner in the NFL.
But no, I would definitely like I mentioned Boyd. I like. Does anybody have a take on him yet? Because he's really weird to me.
Tyler Boyd, it's weird because he was this star ACC receiver last year, and I think people expected him to really take the next step. And this year they're using him like Ty Montgomery was used at Stanford or something like that, where they're giving him a lot of jet sweeps and wide receiver screens. It's almost like, let's see how many times we can get the ball in Tyler Boyd's hands. And it's created this guy who's averaging under 10 yards per catch and really functioning as a running back at times. It's bizarre. He makes a lot of good plays. He makes some good catches, but he doesn't. I don't know that he's. I'm going to have to go back to 2014 and see what kind of speed this guy has, because he's always catching the ball in a short area, and he's always running these little pop passes and jet sweeps. And honestly, I'm seeing the same kind of usage of a guy like Braxton Miller, albeit a lot less frequent usage. And Miller's so much noticeably quicker and faster that it kind of, when I see the two guys, if I watch them on the same day, I'm like, if they had Miller running these plays, he'd be creating more yards after the catch. So Boyd is a player I absolutely think we're going to have to look back at that 2014 tape to get a really clear read on him.
Do you guys think that that's happening because James Conner's no longer in that Pittsburgh backfield?
For sure.
That's kind of what happened with Stanford, right? Because Ty Montgomery was getting all those touches when Stanford was in between finding running backs. Like if they had Christian McCaffrey, I'm not sure Ty Montgomery still gets touches like that. I think Ted Thompson talked about having to go back to the 2013 tape and almost throwing the 2014 tape out when they drafted Montgomery last year.
I think that's a huge part of it.
Well, and let's be fair. I mean, Ty Montgomery hasn't played with a good quarterback in, 3 or 4 years, including this year.
To this date, yep. Free Brownlee.
That should take us into the hot takes. That's a good segue, Seth.
That's what I'm here for. So, Matt, if you have any hot takes or have seen any, feel free to join in, as always. But Justin, go ahead and start us off this week with our hot take segment.
Well, I'm gonna kind of lump two. I have two, so I'm gonna kind of lump them together. First of all, we're dying to know, who is that quarterback that's going to get some undue hype and then end up, being undrafted, a la Brett Smith and Chris Bonner from the last couple of years. And I found that guy yesterday when Blake Fronapple of UMass was invited to the Shrine game, and I saw a couple of people tweeting him. He is a player that I watched one time against Notre Dame, and it's one of the worst quarterback tapes that I've seen of the year. I can't imagine why he's a prospect other than height and I guess maybe arm strength, but he just looked terrible. And I just am happy that I finally found my Chris Bonner this year, because that was a player who I spotted. I can say this because I've talked about how many things I've gotten wrong on this show, but that was a player I spotted a mile away as a guy who just was getting undue hype. And then the other hot quarterback take, and this is from our good friend Emery Hunt, Football Game Plan, and yesterday he tweeted that of the draft eligible quarterbacks that he's watched in this early part of his process, that his top rated draft eligible quarterback is actually Cardale Jones, and he caught a lot of flack for that. And you guys know my take on Cardale Jones. I don't agree with Emery's take, but I think it's great that he put it out there, because if you had if you were saying Cardale Jones was a first-round pick at this time last year in January, there's really nothing he's done on tape that's different from what he did on tape at that time. He hasn't changed. It's just a matter of people getting more tape. And the guy still is undefeated as a starter, so let's not forget that. I loved that take from Emory. I talked to him about it, and he was definitely catching a lot of flack from a lot of people for about 24 hours after that take.
Some quarterback wins. Some quarterback wins at the end of that. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, baby.
So with Jones, it's interesting because we talked about this a lot last year, and the fact that 3 games can't tell you the whole story, but what it can do is make you intrigued enough to bite on the story, right? So Jones gave you 3, a tasting, so to speak, and it left you hungry for more. And then you just got more of it, and you realize that maybe it's not great, right? And so now people are going way the opposite direction. And so it's interesting to see the overcorrection. We rode this train with Logan Thomas. What was this? 3 years ago. What I think it was 2012. I can't remember the year. Maybe it was 2013. That he was almost universally the consensus number 1 prospect going into his junior year, and then people actually watched him, and everybody was like,
Devin Sneed.
Yes, Jevin Sneed. It happens with quarterbacks all the time because it's the most important position. That's why quarterback wins are a real thing, but it's the most important position in the NFL, and if you don't have one, you're always looking for one. So, and then a lot of people that do draft stuff always want to be first. So the idea is, hey, I'm going to be first on Cardale Jones, right? Like I'm going to be the guy that said he's a first-round pick. So Emory's take isn't necessarily that, and I saw this, a guy tweet him this, and Emory's response was great. Emory didn't say he's the best, prospect or however it was said. He said he's the guy right now that's the highest rated quarterback. Again, I don't agree with that either, but I find it interesting, and the way people kind of went after him was interesting as well.
To elaborate on his point, and Cardale Jones does have that prototypical height, weight, prototypical arm strength of an NFL quarterback, and he's kind of a fish out of water in that Ohio State offense. And they go through this playoff run last year where they've got a guy, Tom Herman, who's one of the hot coaching candidates right now, calling plays for him and working to his strengths. And when Cardale came back, he's working with 2 new offensive coordinators, and I think the play caller now is Tim Beck, who came over from Nebraska. And I'm not sure that they really had a really sound plan on how to go about changing the offense to play to Cardale Jones' strengths. So I think he's impacted by that. And so when Emory is looking at this big picture, he's really probably focusing on those 3 games where Cardale Jones was put in a better position to use his skill set, as opposed to maybe the first 10 games of this year where he's constantly looking over his shoulder. Is J.T. Barrett going to come in? They did a lot of flip-flopping during the course of games, which is almost unheard of for a team that's coming off a national championship. So there's a lot of circumstances that have to be put in there. You don't want to make excuses for guys, but it is important to offer explanations for why a guy might not be playing to the level you expected. And again, to me, he's the same guy with the same tools. It's just kind of different circumstances.
If there's one thing that I've learned about myself as a person and as a football evaluator is that I completely 100% embrace variance, and like I would take Jay Cutler and Martavis Bryant as my quarterback wide receiver all day and love the fun of it. So like watching Cardale last year live, I really enjoyed just his approach to the game and the way he opened up things for the whole field. And then when I was charting Devin Smith last year, watching his games with JT Barrett, it was just like, that, and I think this is what everybody was saying, because like I said, I'm not plugged into this sort of stuff at all, but like the way that what his appeal was, I guess, that he could run the offense and was precise and like would keep things moving. But for me personally, I'm not interested in that, I guess, from a quarterback perspective. I'm interested in that variance. Like, maybe it's because like Cam Newton is my quarterback and that sort of stuff. So I don't know. But I agree that I'm still really interested in him as well.
Another hot take I saw this week, and I talked with Justin and Kyle Posey about it a little bit, was because I wanted to make sure I was reading the correct player that he was referring to. Lance Zierlein, a colleague of yours at NFL.com, Matt, wrote that he would not be surprised if Leonard Floyd goes ahead of Joey Bosa. Now, we've talked about Leonard Floyd on the show before, so I want to recap to make sure that I understand. He weighs like 220 pounds, right, Justice?
Yes, yeah. He got moved off the ball too. He's like an inside linebacker in their scheme because Lorenzo Carter, who's a sophomore, took his spot after being like a rotational player as a true freshman. And he's not playing outside backer ahead of Jordan. Like, I'm not sure he's better than Jordan Jenkins. And Jordan Jenkins isn't really that good either. Like, these are guys who probably will both end up as like second rounders on my board. So to say that he's gonna go ahead of Bosa, who like Tunsil and Bosa are like 1A, 1B for me, like with the bullet. Like, I don't think anyone's in their tier. The only other guy that I would say is like close in like athletic ability might be Robert Kimdiche. That seems crazy to me, man. That's low. He's off his rocker.
Really interesting about that take is that 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we've got Deion Jordan and Barkevious Mingo coming out, both light, thin pass rush types, and then last year with Vic Beasley, whose weight was a huge concern, and not one of those guys has really made an impact as a pass rusher. So I'm wondering, like, I know Lance is a plugged-in guy and he's got some good sources, but is the NFL repeating their mistakes right now? If Leonard Floyd is a top 15 pick like he suggested to me, then I believe they are repeating their mistakes, and we've got to learn from this. I don't think Leonard Floyd is a day one pick, probably not a day two pick for me. And another guy who's in that category for me is Daddy Nicholas, who we've talked about on this show, and he's been so bad that I'm not even sure he's draftable this year.
Yeah, R.I.P. He was a real one.
With Floyd, could they be looking at him as like a Telvin Smith type? That
Would you take that in the top
15? Why are you taking him like top 5 then?
Right.
Well, and that was kind of my question then. If they are looking at him as a Telvin Smith type, then doesn't that kind of defeat the I don't know. I don't know a whole lot, so I'm not, I just wanted to make sure I had the right player, because I was very confused by that, because I swore Leonard Floyd weighed like, 215, 220, and so I was confused and wanted to make sure.
And he like high steps too. Like, he doesn't care about getting his feet back in the ground, which is like incredibly important if you're playing like in the NFL in the front seven.
Box. Yeah.
Yeah, like, you need to get your foot in the ground so you can punch someone so you don't get driven off the ball. And he's totally fine with just like high stepping and trying to like swim over guys. And I'm like, man, the guys that you're playing at Vanderbilt are so different than the guys you're going to be playing against in the NFL. You have no idea. I'm not a fan of him.
It's interesting seeing a guy like Bosa already getting chipped away at, when last year there were a lot of people saying that Bosa as a sophomore would have been in contention for that number 1 or top 5 pick last year. So it's another case of a guy where he had to stick around to become draft eligible, and now it's kind of chipping away at his draft stock, so to speak. But I don't believe that there's any problem with Bosa. I still think he's a fantastic player.
Bosa's great. You just got to know what he is. Like, people see like edge rusher and then they're like, oh, Joey Bosa, he's gonna be like Von Miller. And you're like, no, completely different. You don't understand a single thing about this. Like, Bosa's gonna try to get your inside foot back, and that's how he's gonna win. He's not really gonna win around you. He's gonna try to get inside of you with power. which is totally different from a guy like Noah Spence, who might end up being like the top 34 outside linebacker.
And just because he's white doesn't mean he's J.J. Watt. So.
That's exactly.
Do you think he's like J.J. Watt or Jared Abbrederis or like I don't know?
I think he's like Jared Allen.
Wes Welker.
Yeah, he's a Wes Welker type. He's like Danny Woodhead.
Actually, you mentioned Jared Allen. Is Allen really that bad of a comp for him? Right? Like.
I think Bosa's a way better.
I think he's more athletic than Allen.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So we've talked about Cam Jordan, right? Cam Jordan being the comp for him.
That's been my comparison since like May, and Eric Stoner decided to steal it and run with it.
Well,
I got it in print, dog.
Yeah, and we have tape of that, so we're okay. Yeah. You're okay.
We're tape grinders. We're good.
Well, not that kind of tape. I have.
we've got tape of the show where you can talk about that. So
that's my point.
Dating back to last September, probably. So we're good.
We're straight.
Any other hot takes from you guys today?
Speaking of Eric, Eric had a tweet that said, "Crazy that Peyton and Kobe both retired on the same day. Wow." That's really it. I mean, his entire timeline at this point, like him and AP, it's just like, let's try to undercut force players. Let's talk about big draft things. Quarterback wins are a thing, and then like Teddy Bridgewater, and Matt Ryan suck. That's the entire timeline for those two for like the past month.
So quarterback wins are a thing unless it's Teddy Bridgewater because his sample size is too small.
It's much like his knees. Much like his knees.
What is the? Let's see if we got anything behind the scenes, and if you can't talk about it, that's fine. You're just not invited back ever. But what's the conversation about Brock and Peyton in the NFL war rooms, so to speak?
I mean, I think everybody's on the same page at this point that the team is much better off with Brock under center because he's under center. A lot of things that you were hearing out of Denver, especially Cecil Lammey was really talking about this for a long time, was that the whole, about the butting of heads between Peyton and Kubiak and the way they got themselves into this situation because if they wanted to run Kubiak's offense and transition to that, then they should have just nut up and cut Peyton Manning instead of just having. I honestly believe that they got into this weird standoff with him about the pay cut, and I think they really thought that he would balk at the pay cut and then they would have to cut him just to save face. But when he kind of called their bluff, I think that put him in a weird position. Where they had to try to run this compromise, but you just can't do it. Like this sounds crazy, but Peyton's almost like Tebow in that if you are going to have him as your quarterback, you have to completely commit to doing things his way. Although that doesn't sound like it makes any sense, in a way I think it kind of is the same thing. And they just weren't in a position where they wanted to do that anymore. The personnel that they have just much better suits this offense. And Brock is playing. I mean, Osweiler's playing well, and I think that I don't know, nobody at unless you're like a delusional person. I'm trying to mince words here if you can't tell. I'm not going to call out anybody in particular, any type of person in particular. Unless you're delusional, or you're being too sentimental about it, is undeniable that they're better off with Brock Osweiler under center.
Matt, were you trying to?
Don't need him to do that much.
Were you trying to be kind of Jimmy Haslam in the inevitable chance that Peyton gets cut and then is signed by the Browns for the last 3 games of his career before he gets injured?
After you guys trade Johnny to Dallas, after Johnny goes to Dallas,
right after Manziel goes to Dallas and becomes a Pro Bowler.
Because you can't take Kirk Cousins because Kirk Cousins talked bad about you guys to his family.
That was Connor Cook, yeah.
Because someone on Twitter said, "Oh yeah, Connor Cook." That's the same person. They both went to Michigan State.
Oh jeez.
All white people look the same.
He was off his board, dude. Is off his board.
Off his board, man. Off his board. Just like Jameis Winston was off of Kuiper's board. These are facts. It's a wrap.
Jameis, he's played well. Yeah, we'll have to do an overview show of last year's takes and how awful everybody was.
Yeah, that's an entire hour in and of itself, at least.
Guys, I had Devontae. I'm just so stupid. I'm so an idiot for outing how terrible I am at my own thing. But I had Devontae. Okay, well, good. I had Devontae Davis as like a top 10 receiver in this draft. That guy's not even on a practice squad. He got cut before final cuts of Eagles camp, and he's not. I mean, like, I don't know what the hell he's doing. It's like there are so many like beautiful, humbling moments in this that you just have to. It's fun. It's fun. That part of it's fun.
It's quite simple. At this point, you just say they are not using him right.
Yeah. Nobody's even using him though.
My 2-year-long Vic Beasley take is gonna haunt me, man. It's gonna be disgusting.
Oh man, he's been dreadful.
The needle needs to come back. I think it's fairly certain that Vic Beasley went from being a guy who was so jacked to the point that it looked like his Under Armour shirt was gonna tear off instantly, to wearing like medium-sized sweatshirts and having them like baggy in his like games. It's like, oh wow, you were crazy for like a month, and then once certain NFL tests are coming out,
hit that rookie wall.
Something like that. Yeah, man, it's not gonna be good. I don't know. I'm hoping he's hurt, so I don't look like an idiot, because
that's all. Yeah, that's all we're all hoping for. We're just hoping that the guy's hurt. Like,
well, at least we have Devontae Parker, right? Devontae Parker actually is hurt, so
yeah.
And Kevin White, so we're
Kevin White, yeah.
And Rashad Perryman. Anybody that likes all three. Even Aguilar's been hurt. Funchess was hurt like in training camp. So if at any point you liked a rookie receiver, you just be like, nah, dude, the guy's hurt.
Well, the thing about Perriman is Perriman like tripped on his hairline or something, right? He tripped on his hairline.
Oh my god! There's a great clip of me like when I was on the Audible hangout for the live draft show of like me like grabbing at my neck in disgust when I saw Perryman's hairline for the first time. That was like I lost a year of my life when I saw that.
Then you moved to LA.
He just keeps looking in the mirror. Every time he just looks in the mirror, it just starts growing away as he stares into it.
Dude, how do you not know? Like,
I'll just take the blade to the dome. Matt Hasselbeck did it for white people. If like Matt Hasselbeck can take the blade to the dome, Perriman, you can do it. I promise.
Yeah. It'll look all right.
All right, guys. Well, it's been fun tonight, Matt. We appreciate you coming on and hanging out with us. Tell us what you're working on for this week and going forward, and where we can obviously find your work at NFL.com.
Yeah, you can find my work on NFL.com for the rest of the season. And I'm still doing stuff for football guys as well. And during the off season, I'll be more ramped up doing things on my own, like for Backyard Banter and for football guys again. But for the rest of the season, yeah, you can find my fantasy football stuff at NFL.com. Fantasy season's coming to an end, of course, but that just means that there's going to be, Rich Rebar from the Fake Football and Roto World puts it really well that when you're doing fantasy stuff in season, you're basically like on a shot clock. So at this point, like it gets to be exhausting. So I'm really excited to, like I mentioned, to freshen things up. So yeah, you can find me on NFL.com. You can find me on Twitter at Matt Harmon _BYB if you don't follow me, and you want to see some dog pictures, you can do that.
Yeah, Charlie didn't make an appearance. I thought we paid for that.
Yeah, he's actually like I have a roommate now. I mean, well, I had roommates last time we talked to, but he's actually out there. Yo, Charlie has reached like internet celebrity. Like he's more famous than me, and it's insane. My sister was texting with me the other day. She's getting a dog, and she was saying her dog's gonna be cooler than mine. I'm like, no, like my dog's literally an internet celebrity, and I took like 10 screenshots of people like tweeting me and I know I like people that ask me fantasy questions. I know what you're doing when you like ask me like, hey, what's Charlie's thought on this trade? Like, I know you know that I'm going to answer your question because you mentioned the dog. And I mean, I do it, but it's working. But I just want you to know that I know what you're doing.
There you go, folks. Ask Matt about his dog. Free fantasy advice.
Yeah.
I just DM him. That's all I do. And
it's true.
Hope he responds.
I always respond.
He always responds. Yeah. I'm just messing with you. All right, guys. It's been fun. We'll be back next week, maybe with a guest, maybe with just the three of us. We'll start to talk a little bit about the Shrine Game and Senior Bowl invites, and probably take, I don't know, maybe a look at the upcoming bowl games. I don't know.
We'll have some playoff talk because by this time next week we'll know who that Final Four is.
Yeah, it's going to be Iowa.
Go Iowa.
Yeah, I just want Iowa for the tiers on the timeline. That's all. No offense, Justin.
It's going to be
if they beat Bama.
It's going to be Bama, Michigan State, and then it's going to be Oklahoma, and then it's going to be Ohio State after Clemson loses to North Carolina, and people are going to flip out.
Oh, jeez. You've had enough success for 1 year. Go away.
I'm a Browns fan, man.
Yeah, but you're an Ohio State fan, so that trumps it. You could be Justice. Look, you have Vernon Adams that's injured, and you end up 9-3 in
Vernon
Oregon.
Adams low key is a god right now. I don't know what happened to Vernon Adams. Vernon Adams leads the NCAA in passing efficiency, and he completed over 80% of his passes against Stanford and USC, who are now playing in the Pac-12 championship. I don't know what happened to Vernon Adams, but like Vernon Adams like actually going to get drafted now. It's crazy.
What happened is the Pac-12 is not good. Justice.
Yeah.
And you sacrificed all of that karma against obviously Aaron Rodgers. So
yeah, right. Like there's a tipping point from when Oregon was good and when Green Bay was good, and it's just completely inverted now.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening. Check us out on iTunes and Stitcher Radio and all the Draft Breakdown podcasts as they continue on. Thanks for listening. Have a good night, everybody.